My son, Victor Lindquist, called me at 6 a.m. on September 12th from a beach in Santorini and said exactly one sentence. "You'll manage fine without me, right?" Then he hung up before I could answer. 4 hours later, 340 people filled the auditorium at Nordvik Marine Engineering to watch me walk to that podium one last time after 35 years. The first seat, the one with my son's name on it, was empty.
I didn't call him back. I didn't delay the ceremony. I didn't say a single word about it to anyone in that room. Because what Victor didn't know was that I had spent 15 years preparing for the exact moment he wouldn't be there. And less than an hour later, I handed over 650,000 euros, not to my own son. Before I go any further, if this story already feels familiar, if you've ever quietly set something aside for someone who deserved it more than the person who shares your last name, drop a comment and tell me what city you're watching from and what time it is where you are. I read every single one. I'm Anders Lindqvist. This is the story of how I handed over an entire life's work, not to the man who carries my name, but to the one who earned it. Now let's go back 20 years to a July evening at the Nordvik shipyard when a fire nearly took my life. I've lost count of how many podiums I stood behind across 35 years at the Nordvik shipyard, but my hands had never shaken like they did that afternoon. 3 o'clock, September 12th. Late summer sun cut through the glass roof of Assembly Hall 4, where they'd set up 340 navy blue plastic chairs in 12 rows, facing a banner that read, 35 years, Anders Lindqvist. 3 local news cameras stood in 3 corners of the room. This wasn't just an internal retirement send-off anymore. The company had decided to live stream it, because I was the first chief engineer in Nordvik's history to make it 35 years without a single break in service. I stood in the wings watching the front row through a gap in the curtain, the row reserved for family. 5 chairs, each with a brass nameplate screwed into the backrest. My chair was empty because I'd be sitting in it after the speech. Next to it, a second empty chair, engraved. Victor Lindqvist. It stayed empty. I'd known since 7 that morning when my phone buzzed exactly once, not a call, a text. "You'll manage without me, right?" We couldn't change the flights. No congratulations, no apology. 14 words sent at 6:04 a.m. Gothenburg time, midnight in Santorini, where my son and Camille were asleep in a 5-star hotel overlooking the Aegean. I didn't answer that message. I put the phone in my desk drawer, locked it, and put on the charcoal suit my wife, Ingrid, had had tailored for me 12 years earlier, before she died. 3,400 kilometers away, while I was knotting my tie, Victor was stretched out on a lounger beside an infinity pool overlooking the Santorini caldera. Camille lay next to him in oversized sunglasses, an orange cocktail in her hand. Victor's phone buzzed on the glass table the 3rd time that morning. The screen read, "Local news. Live. Tribute ceremony for Chief Engineer Anders Lindqvist's 35 years of service." Victor glanced at the screen for exactly a second and a half. Then he turned the phone face down on the table and said to Camille, not even looking at her, eyes still shut against the sun, "He's used to standing up there alone. That's just who he's always been. That's who I'd always been." I wasn't there to hear it, but I'd know that line, word for word, only a few weeks later. Because a former colleague of mine happened to be at that resort, overheard it, and repeated it back to me, syllable by syllable, his voice shaking with disbelief that anyone could say that about their own father. But in that moment, I didn't know any of it yet. In that moment, I knew exactly one thing. The seat beside mine was empty, and 340 people were waiting for me to walk out on stage. The host called my name. Applause rolled through the hall like a wave. I walked out, shook the CEO's hand, and stood behind an oak podium carved with the company logo. The same oak I'd used, years earlier, to build 3 boxes now sitting in a closet at home. But that's a story for another chapter. I looked down at the front row. 1 second. My son's chair, empty. 2 seconds. I heard a camera swivel quietly, pushing in on my face. I watched that footage later, and I saw myself, a 62-year-old man with grey hair, standing dead still for exactly 3 seconds in front of a lens broadcasting to an entire city, eyes fixed on an empty plastic chair. 3 seconds. I didn't clear my throat to cover the awkwardness. I didn't scan the crowd for an assistant to ask if anyone had reached Victor. I didn't ask for a 5-minute delay to wait for family. I did something no one in that room, not even the CEO standing beside me, could have predicted. I turned and searched the crowd for a face I knew better than my own son's, and I said it loud enough for the microphone to catch. "Matteo, come sit up here with me." The whole hall went silent for exactly half a second, the specific kind of silence that only happens when 340 people realize, all at once, that they've just witnessed something they'll be telling people about for years. Matteo Hoffman, 32, wearing the only shirt he owned that wasn't stained with engine grease, rose from the 4th row where he'd been sitting with the ordinary shipyard crew. He looked at me, froze for a second, then walked up the aisle between the rows, through a scattering of confused applause from a crowd that had no idea yet what it was watching. He sat down in Victor Lindqvist's chair. I didn't swap out that brass nameplate. I left it exactly where it was, screwed to the back of the seat, while Matteo sat on top of it. A small detail, but later, when people replayed the footage, they'd freeze that frame and zoom in, and the comments would fill up with one question: why didn't he change the name on the chair? The answer is simple. I didn't need to. The name on that brass plate was never the most important thing that afternoon. What mattered was who actually showed up and sat in that seat when it counted. I kept giving my speech like nothing had happened. I talked about 35 years, about the ships I'd helped launch, about nights on watch in the engine room while storms slammed into Gothenburg's harbor. My voice didn't shake. My hands had stopped shaking too, because I'd been rehearsing for this exact moment. Not the speech, but the moment of looking down at an empty chair and not feeling betrayed. For 15 years. 15 years I'd known this day was coming, not because I had some gift for prophecy, because I'd watched Victor drift away from me, inch by inch, year by year, ever since his mother's funeral, and I'd made a decision that very night, 15 years ago, that not one person, not even my own lawyer, knew in full. I want you to understand something strange right at the start of this story. I wasn't angry at Victor that afternoon. It wasn't that I'd already forgiven him. And it wasn't that it didn't hurt anymore. I had simply stopped being surprised. And when you stop being surprised by the indifference of someone you love most, you do one of 2 things. You break or you prepare. I chose to prepare. And what I had prepared, just 30 minutes after that moment on stage, was about to leave the entire room, and later, when this footage spread, millions of strangers holding their breath. Because the number I was about to announce wasn't an ordinary token of gratitude. It was 35 years of quietly turning down every single executive bonus the company had ever offered me. And it was about to be handed to someone who didn't carry the Lindqvist name. I closed my speech with a line I'd rewritten 7 times over 3 weeks, 35 years, and I never built a single ship out of steel. I built it out of the people I trusted. Applause rose. I stepped back, and that's when the CEO, a woman named Freya Solberg, 10 months into the job, walked up to the podium holding a navy blue envelope. She had no idea I'd just invited Matteo to sit in the front row. The program in her hand, printed 3 weeks earlier, held exactly one line: presentation of the legacy gift, recipient, see sealed envelope. Freya opened that envelope in front of 340 people and 3 live cameras. Nordvik Marine Engineering, she read, her voice shaking slightly, because even she hadn't known the number inside until that exact moment, is proud to announce this year's legacy gift in the amount of 650,000 euros awarded to... She paused for exactly 1 second. Mr. Matteo Hoffman. There was no applause at first. There was a collective gasp. 340 people inhaling at once, and not one of them daring to exhale first. I saw phones lift into the air, recording. I saw Matteo's face, a man who 30 seconds earlier thought he'd simply been invited up to fill an empty family seat, go completely pale, his lips moving without sound. 650,000 euros wasn't a bonus, it was a number I had built up, year by year, over 15 years, every single time the board offered me an executive bonus. 8% one year, 11% another, nearly 14% of the engineering division's profit in the best years, and every single time I signed the same form, transfer the entire amount into a private trust, held under a lawyer in Malmo that even Nordvik's own HR department didn't know existed. I didn't do it because I hated money. I did it because of a man named Carl Hoffman. 20 years earlier, in this very assembly hall, back when it was still Bay 4, no glass roof, just old corrugated metal that caught fire far too easily, I was inspecting a weld on the lowest deck of a half-built cargo ship when an acetylene tank exploded less than 6 meters away from me. Fire climbed the rust-proofing coat on the walls faster than I could stand up, and thick black smoke sealed off the only way out before I even registered what was happening. Carl was the night shift welder, working a deck above. Rescue wasn't his job. No one ordered him back into that fire. But he heard the explosion, ran straight toward it, and pulled me out through a gap barely 80 centimeters wide, while the melting rust-proofing dripped onto his own shoulders. We got clear of that hull exactly 40 seconds before the whole deck collapsed. Carl never said a word about it for years afterward. He never asked for recognition, never gave an interview, even turned down the company medal they tried to give him. All he ever said to me, that same night, the two of us sitting on the hospital steps still smelling of smoke, was, "You owe me something, but I will never ask you to pay it in money." 18 years later, Carl's lungs, permanently damaged by the smoke and chemicals from that fire, though no doctor, no insurance form would ever officially confirm the connection, finally gave out. He died of chronic respiratory failure on a February morning at 53. I sat beside his hospital bed for his last 3 days. Carl's wife had died years before. His son, Matteo, 17 at the time, sat in the corner of the room, not crying, just staring at the heart monitor. The last thing Carl said to me, his voice breaking with every breath because each one was a fight, wasn't about himself. "Take care of Matteo for me." 5 words, not "thank you for staying by my side," not "I forgive you for anything." Just 5 words, and I spent the next 15 years of my life repaying a debt that the man who asked for it never intended to collect in money. I stood in front of 340 people and told that story, shorter than I've just told it to you, more controlled, the way I've lived it for 20 years, and I saw something I hadn't expected. People in that hall starting to cry, not over the money, because in 90 seconds they understood they'd just watched a debt of loyalty repaid in full in public, in front of an entire city's cameras. Matteo couldn't speak for the first 2 minutes. When he finally stood and someone handed him a microphone, all he managed was 1 sentence, his voice breaking apart. "My father wouldn't want me to accept this." I took the microphone from his hand gently and answered him in front of the whole room. "Your father never asked for anything. This isn't a debt I'm repaying to him. This is a gift I'm giving to you, because for 15 years, you were by my side in exactly the way a son is supposed to be by his father's side." I didn't say Victor's name in that sentence. I didn't need to. Everyone in that room, and later, everyone watching this footage online, understood exactly who was missing. What I didn't know standing on that stage was that 3,400 kilometers away, Victor's phone was already buzzing without stopping. Not one message anymore, but dozens, from friends, old colleagues, even his own law firm, all sending the same link to a video already spreading at a speed that not one of us, not even me, could control anymore. Victor watched that video for the first time at 4:47 p.m. Santorini time on the very phone he'd turned face down on the glass table 2 hours earlier. Camille told me about it weeks later, her voice still not quite steady. She watched his face go paler with every second of the 90-second clip, already shared more than 4,000 times in its first half hour. He didn't say a word. He watched it exactly 3 times, pausing on the same frame each time, the moment Freya read the name Matteo Hoffman. Then he set the phone down, stood up, and walked out of the resort without telling Camille where he was going. I didn't know any of this while it was happening. I was in the green room behind the stage, receiving hugs and congratulations, trying not to think about whether my son might be watching the exact moment that was supposed to belong to him. But I had already been thinking about the 15 years before it, and if I'm going to tell you why that empty chair didn't surprise me, I need to tell you what filled that space, year after year, while Victor was busy being somewhere else. February, 5 years ago, a freak snowstorm tore through Gothenburg and collapsed a large section of the roof on the east side of my house. I called Victor first. He was my son. That was the natural reflex. He answered with party music thumping in the background and said, "Call a contractor, Dad. I'll wire you the money." He did send money, 500 euros, transferred within 10 minutes. So fast I understood it wasn't concern. It was a way to end the call as quickly as possible. 40 minutes later, with no one asking him to, Matteo showed up at my door with a roll of tarp and a ladder borrowed from the shipyard. He climbed onto that roof in gusting wind at -6 degrees Celsius and held the collapsed section together for 3 hours until it was fully dark. He didn't text to ask if I needed help. He just heard about the storm on local radio, remembered which neighborhood I lived in, and drove over. I stood under the eave watching him work, and I remember thinking, this isn't the first time. It wasn't. November 8 years ago, I fell in the bathroom at midnight, my knee cracking against the sink, bleeding badly. I didn't call an ambulance. Stubborn. I thought I could manage, but I called Matteo because his number was the only one I knew by heart besides my own. He was at my house in 12 minutes, still in his pajamas, slippers on his feet, and drove me to Sahlgrenska Hospital himself at 1:20 in the morning. He sat in the waiting room until 5 a.m., not one complaint, then went straight to his shift at 7 without sleeping a minute. I didn't call Victor that night. I'd stopped even thinking to call him, and that, I realized much later, hurt worse than him simply not answering. There's one detail I've never told anyone, not even Matteo. 3 years ago, on a Saturday afternoon in June, Victor actually almost came. He called at 2 in the afternoon, said he was driving down from Stockholm, would stop for dinner, the first time in almost a year. I went to the market and bought exactly the salmon he liked, wiped down the oak dining table Ingrid used to set for his childhood birthdays. At 6 that evening, he called back. His voice was rushed, traffic noise behind him. "Dad, work just called. There's a merger I have to handle tonight. I'm sorry, I'll make it up to you next week." Next week never came. I sat alone at that table that night, watching the salmon go cold, and I wasn't angry. That's the strangest part. I no longer had the energy left to be angry. I just sat there, looking at the empty chair across from me, and thought, here we are again. I didn't know, that night, that this exact scene, a father sitting alone across from an empty chair, would repeat itself, magnified 340 times over on a stage, broadcast live 3 years later. For 15 years, Matteo never once asked for anything in return. He never once mentioned the trust fund I was quietly building. In fact, until that afternoon on stage, he didn't even know it existed. He helped me, not because he was waiting to be repaid. He helped me because his father had asked him to, and because, I believe this completely, he had thought of me as a second father long before I ever thought about giving him anything at all. That's the difference I want you to understand clearly. Before I tell you what happened when Victor's plane landed at Landvetter Airport at midnight that same night, his eyes bloodshot, still holding the phone, he'd replayed that 90-second video on more than 20 times. Victor didn't knock. He used the spare key I'd never asked back, let himself in at 12:40 a.m., and walked into the living room with Camille behind him, their suitcases still sitting in the car. "What the hell were you thinking?" That was the first thing he said to me. Not, "Hello, Dad," not, "I'm sorry I wasn't there." His voice shook, not with grief, but with something closer to humiliation. "The whole country's watching that video. My colleagues are texting me asking if I knew you were giving that guy 650,000 euros. 650,000 euros, Dad. That was supposed to be my money." I was sitting in the old armchair in the corner of the living room, still in my suit, a cup of tea gone cold in my hand that I hadn't touched since coming home. I didn't stand up right away. I didn't raise my voice. I let that sentence hang in the air for exactly 5 seconds, long enough for Victor to hear it back for himself. "That was supposed to be my money." He repeated it, quieter this time, as if he'd started hearing something wrong in it too. Camille stood behind him, silent, arms wrapped around herself as if she were cold, though I always kept the house at a steady 21 degrees. I set the teacup down. I didn't argue. I didn't explain. I got up, walked into the bedroom, and pulled 3 oak boxes out of the closet. Boxes I'd built with my own hands 12 years earlier, right after Ingrid died, on the nights I couldn't sleep. I set all 3 on the dining table, the same oak table Ingrid used to set for Victor's childhood birthdays, the same table that 3 years ago once held a plate of cold salmon. "Open the first box," I said. Nothing more. Victor lifted the lid, hesitant. Inside was a stack of papers nearly 4 centimeters thick, arranged chronologically, each with a handwritten note in the margin. Tuition invoices from Uppsala Law School, totaling 71,000 euros over 4 years, paid under my name, not his, because he'd always believed he'd been on a full scholarship. There was no scholarship. I'd called the university's finance office myself, arranged for them to send him a fake scholarship letter, while the real invoices came straight to my address. Next were the deposit receipts for his first apartment in Stockholm, 34,000 euros, wired from an account registered to a fictitious financial consulting firm I'd set up purely so he'd believe it was a low-interest bank loan he'd been lucky to qualify for. Last were the wedding invoices with Camille. Everything, from the 5-star hotel reception to the 2.1-carat diamond ring, 58,000 euros total, money he still believed had come from a small inheritance left by a distant aunt who had never actually existed. "Altogether," I said, my voice still even, 163,000 euros. "I never told you, because I didn't want you growing up thinking you owed me anything. I wanted you to believe you'd built all of it yourself." Victor couldn't speak. His hand shook as he turned over each invoice, and I saw Camille, for the first time that night, raise a hand to her mouth. "Open the second box," I said. Inside were photographs, hundreds, sorted by year. A photo of Ingrid and me wearing the same sweaters 3 winters in a row because we didn't buy new ones to save the money for his tuition fund. A photo of the beat-up Volvo we drove for 14 years, though the company had offered me a new company car 3 separate times. A photo of Ingrid, taken at 11 at night in the kitchen, still in her teaching clothes, grading papers she'd taken on for weekend tutoring to earn extra money. every single euro of which she never kept for herself. Your mother tutored every single Saturday for 11 straight years, I said. You never once asked why. You thought she just loved teaching. Victor sank into a chair, no longer able to stand. Open the third box, I said, and for the first time that night, my own voice caught. Inside were handwritten letters from Ingrid. 17 of them written over the last 6 months of her life, each dated, hidden away for me to read slowly after she was gone, because she knew she wouldn't have time to say everything she wanted to say out loud. I pulled out the last one, dated November 3rd, 12 years earlier, and read the final lines aloud to Victor. Anders, by the time you read this, Victor will probably be grown, living his own life, busy the way well-raised children stay busy. Don't be angry with him. Remind him, if you ever get the chance, that time is the one gift that can never be bought back. Money, a house, an education. I gave him all of that because I loved him. But if I could only leave him one thing, I wish it were the Saturday. Afternoons we never got to have together. The room went completely silent, no clock ticking, no wind against the window, just the broken sound of Victor's breathing, crying, for the first time in front of me since his mother's funeral. I mistook your patience, he said, his voice barely audible, for permission to live the way I did. I didn't answer right away. I let that sentence stay in the room, among 3 open boxes, beside Camille crying quietly in the corner of the sofa, beside 15 years the two of us had just relived together in exactly 40 minutes. Then I said the one sentence I'd been preparing for this moment for 12 years, since the night I finished building those 3 boxes. I'm not angry that you lived your own life. I only wish you had lived it a little closer to me. 6 months have passed since the night those 3 boxes opened on my dining table. It's March now, and I'm sitting in that same armchair, looking out at the first buds coming up in the backyard, writing you the final lines of this story. Victor and Camille finalized their divorce on January 4th at Gothenburg's family court. No drama, no drawn-out fight over assets. They agreed to split everything within 6 weeks. Camille moved back to Malmö and continued her interior design work. 3 weeks ago, she sent me exactly one message, unsigned. I'm sorry I never asked Victor why he almost never talked about you. I think I avoided that question too, because I was afraid of the answer. I didn't reply right away. But I read it 3 times, and I believe it's the closest thing to a real apology she was able to give. Late, incomplete, but real. Victor moved into an apartment 15 minutes from my house. He changed jobs, still a lawyer, but he moved from corporate mergers into legal counsel for small businesses in the region, a nearly 40% pay cut that 6 months earlier I would have sworn he'd never accept. He told me, one evening, that he didn't need more money anymore. He needed more time. Now, every evening at exactly 6:30, my doorbell rings. Not once a week for a holiday like before. Every evening. Some nights he just stays for dinner and leaves. Some nights he stays late, and the two of us watch old home videos from when he was small. Tapes I'd kept for 30 years that he'd never once asked to see. Matteo used part of the money, 210,000 euros, to open his own small boat repair shop right near the harbour called Hofmark Workshop, combining his father's surname with the Swedish word for mark, as in a legacy left behind. The rest he put into savings untouched, in case, he said, I need it for a family of my own someday. He still comes for dinner every Sunday, exactly as he has for 15 years. Nothing about that friendship changed, not even after he received the largest sum of money of his life. One evening last month, when both Victor and Matteo were at my house together, the first time the two of them sat at the same table since the night of the 3 boxes, I brought out a 4th box. I'd built it myself in the garage over 3 weeks, the same oak as the other 3. But this one was empty. I set it in front of Victor. Those 3 boxes, I said, held everything your mother and I gave you in your first 30 years. Money, sacrifice, the things we did when you weren't looking. This box, you fill yourself. I won't put money in it. I won't put a single invoice in it. You fill it with the time you give me from today until the day I'm no longer here." Victor didn't say anything. He just nodded, took the box, and hugged me. The first hug between the two of us I can clearly remember since his mother's funeral 12 years ago. I'm Anders Lindqvist. I'm 62 years old, and tonight, for the first time in 15 years, both of my sons are sitting down for dinner at this oak table. That's the biggest lesson I've taken from this whole story, and I want to share it directly with you before I close this chapter of my family's life. The greatest legacy a person leaves behind is never a number in a bank account. It's the Saturday afternoons you didn't miss, the calls you picked up, the doors you walked through, no matter how tired you were. Money can buy a great many things, but it can never buy back lost time, and it's never what actually makes someone feel loved. If any of you watching this recognize yourself in Victor's story, if you're also chasing something that feels important while you let a call, a dinner, a visit slip by, I hope you'll put your phone down for a moment and call that person today. Don't wait for a televised ceremony to figure it out. And if you recognize yourself in Matteo's story, the one who quietly showed up, asking for nothing, I want you to know that your kindness was never wasted, even when no one acknowledged it out loud at the time. Thank you for staying with me. If the Lindqvist family's story felt familiar to you in any way, leave a comment and tell me your own story. I read every single one, always. If this is your first time watching this channel, hit subscribe and turn on notifications, because next week I'll be telling you another story about a woman who waited 20 years to speak a truth her entire family had buried. I'll see you in the next video.
Headed out to the highway, I should have seen it coming for the years left in the dust.